Bye.
Happy Thursday, Marcin. If folks have any agenda items they want to talk about today?
So when are we, is there an ETA for the release for the distribution spec?
It's whenever we can get the votes. So that's the one, not really agenda item per se, but kind of action item is that we do have those 2 votes that are open right now. So maintainers need to have a look. And Sajay, thanks so much for taking care of the signs.
No worries. Oh, I forgot to include Tiana. Sorry.
No worries. You knocked out 90% of it. Other than that, the only other thing I can think of to talk about today, other than trying to get some votes for this stuff, and I think the only person we can harass for that is Tianon.
Yeah.
So
Tiana showed
we'll
up
be,
and he's in trouble.
we will be harassment light on that one. So the vote is open for folks that might be checking the recording later on, stuff like that. Otherwise, the only other thing I can think of is that we have been making some progress in working groups lately. And so I don't know if we want to just kind of fill the team in here on what's happening on the working groups, just to make sure people are aware. And Marcin, it's effectively just going to be the image compatibility because this is the only one making progress. I'll see if I can pull this up so I can share something, folks can have a look and see what they think. I feel like it's nice to see what is happening in other places so people can be aware. Oh, and Rom, you're gonna revive an old issue here. What are you reviving? The search requirement. Okay. Do you want to talk about the search requirement or working groups? I can go either way. We didn't have anything on the agenda.
No, we can do the working groups first. It came up earlier. So let's finish that and then we can get to this.
Alrighty. Getting this to a point that I can share a screen, which I think is now. So we have recently added requirements. And this is coming out of the image compatibility group. So I just kind of want to give folks here a view for what's happening over there so that if you have opinions, concerns, requests, that kind of stuff, this is a good time to say you guys are going right track, wrong track, whichever you want to think about. Let's get some of my windows open here as well. And so what they've been looking at specifically has been saying, hey, can we get a lot more granular on how we are picking images to run on machines? And they're looking like HPC environments, places that are running stuff with GPUs, and maybe the GPU is specific to a certain kind of graphic card. So they want to be able to compile their applications with much tighter binding to the hardware they're going to run that container on. And we've come up with various requirements in here. And Marcin, feel free to interject at any time, but otherwise I'll just kind of keep going here. And a lot of this just talking about, hey, we want to be able to add image compatibility independently. So that kind of went to some folks want to look at this as something we can add as an external artifact. That's a take on this. You know, these are a lot of people come up with individual use cases. Let's see. And then the various kind of different scenarios here, you know, whether it's like an AMD or a Intel CPU, maybe there are different instruction sets they want to be able to leverage on this stuff. Just going to kind of skim through these. Anybody that sees something you want to chat about, feel free to jump in. Because some of this also goes to different, and I should probably also share the link in our chat and otherwise. So I'll share it in the Zoom chat, and I'll also share it in our meeting notes here. So everybody has it. We've been looking at this from like the image author, but also from example, like people writing tools on this stuff. The sysadmin that's going to run things on their machine, or the runtime administrator that's picking. There's a concept of, should this be something that happens from the cluster administrator when they are scheduling workloads across multiple machines? Is this something that should be run from an individual node if it's looking at a multi-platform image and needs to pick which image it wants to run? There's also the concept that you don't even have a cluster yet, you want to provision a cluster. And so how do you know how best to provision that cluster given what images you want to run on it? So a few different takes about how this might play out in the real world. And I'm talking and skimming at the same time. So like I say, if I don't pick up on something that you want to chat about, feel free to stop me here. We've also got a few PRs on this talking about different implementations as well. So that might be or proposals. So that might also be a good thing just to kind of get a little bit of feedback on.
I regret not reading into this sooner. I really want to understand it. I think it's a good opportunity to just ask a high level question that I haven't seen an answer to, but I'm sure you all know. What what is this doing that we can't do with os.features in the image config? Like I know that hasn't worked because we don't do anything with it. But I'm wondering, like, what are we speccing around something where we really have just an implementation gap and an adoption gap, or is there something that this does that can't be done with the image config as specified?
There are few use cases in that. First one is the way how you want to provide and update the compatibility data. So for example, if you want to update something that changed for the image, you have to release the image again. And for some communities, this is not acceptable. That's why there is an artifact idea. Another thing is sometimes there are different dependencies for the compatibility. You have to implement logical or represent some stuff in more complex way. That's why there is an idea to represent compatibility specification as a graph. So we just cannot use the image spec.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So what we have now is too simplistic. This is sort of
Yes.
like that can work for kind of a lower granularity problem, but for things like this, yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you for that.
Sure, no problem.
And there are a lot of use cases, people pull in different directions. And so depending on which direction you're pulling, we might be able to do it with what you're saying, Jesse, versus I think some of the directions other people are looking to go probably can't.
It needs a little more. Yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
For example, some of these are looking at, say, the runtime administrator. And I think somewhere in here, yeah, I think this, if this wasn't me, this was something that I was pushing for, which is that from the runtime perspective, we might not want to have your container D, Podman, pick a runtime of choice out there. If it sees the image index and it sees 3 different implementations for AMD 64, they may not want to have to go back out to the registry with multiple follow-ups of, okay, tell me about the different compatibility spec for this artifact versus this one versus this image versus another image. They may not want to make a bunch of extra queries. And so this would be good to start getting some feedback from people that are working in those other spaces to say whether this is a hard requirement or just a nice to have.
Yeah, so this is sort of building in spec what we've discussed as like sparse lists, right? Or sparse indexes.
Not even, I mean, a sparse manifest is kind of a cool concept where you don't have to fill out all the, you might have an
Yeah.
index that has more entries than actual images under it. This says you might actually have all the images there, but you might have 4 different implementations for your platform.
Yeah, yeah.
And right now you just pick the first one because that's kind of the going design we told people to go with. But the direction a lot of this going with, if you start uploading an external artifact that refers back to that image, now you need to do the refers API, then you need to parse the refers response list, then you need to go pull that individual artifact, then you need to go pull the layer for that artifact. You just added 4 or 5 different API calls for that one image remotely, just to find out, is that one the best, or do I need to check these other 3? And you probably have to check all 3 to compare them.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, sorry, I probably chose weird words there. I didn't mean they're the same. It's sort of like coming at that problem from a more regimented kind of point of view. Yeah, that's cool. That's great. I mean, yeah, especially as we get to larger images, more architectures, more, yeah, like, and more refers. Neat.
Yeah, I mean, the other option is that you wouldn't have to do this with a refer. You might find a way you could do it in the index itself, put some extra metadata in there, put some annotations in there, something like that, so that you don't have to go back out and make those other API calls. But if you go that direction, then you lose some of the other use cases we've talked about in here, which is that then you can't follow up with modifying the image after the fact to say, hey, I know we said this was only going to work on the NVIDIA GPU XYZ, but they just released V3 of that one, and we support that as well. You don't have to rebuild everything for that one. All right, I'll also include a couple things for the spec maintainers. So these were pretty much all me in here, so I can talk to them a little bit, which was that I was hoping no matter what we make, that we're not breaking any other specs out there. So if someone has something for image signing or something like that, we're not breaking the digest everywhere. Hopefully that as new hardware devices are added or another kernel release comes out or some other external dependency, we don't have to keep reversioning the spec every time we come out with something new external to our project. That would be nice. I don't want to have a spec that lists every single piece of hardware in the world. That seems like an impossible task. And yeah, ideally, I'd like to see us not overlap. So some of this stuff to me almost feels like we're getting into SBOM territory. And so I'd like to try to see if we can keep a good division between what the SBOM groups are doing versus what we do, so that we're not overlapping too much. But yeah, a lot going on here. So a bunch of requirements. There are also a handful of pull requests where we have not merged them yet, but we've got a handful of different approaches. Different people have different opinions. And so as we go through these, I don't think we have all the people to represent their opinions here. Apologies, I moved Zoom windows out of the way here. One approach that I went with, which generated a lot of feedback from people saying, wait, what? Is that I kept it extremely simple. Let me just view the file, that's probably easier. Kept it extremely simple where I was just going to put everything in the index and just add extra annotations. And from the runtime standpoint, if the runtime supports some feature, the runtime could be told, prioritize any image that you see with this annotation on it. So maybe some kind of flag to containerd that says, hey, you're running on a machine that has this stuff. Just put some flags to the containerd or a configuration option of a bunch of annotations that it likes to see. And if it sees that, it'll prefer that over the one that doesn't have the annotation. So extremely simplistic. I think when I start going through a bunch of requirements, we'll see how well it does, but that is an option out there. Some of the others, Marcin, picking on yours, I'll go ahead and let you talk to this one.
Yeah, I completely changed the scope of this proposal because at the beginning it was too big and too complex. And I tried to solve two things: image selection, improve a little bit by extending platform variants, and provide some specification for compatibility against host operating system. So right now the proposal is just very simple, that we have basically requiring to create artifact, put their specification that can represent graph of requirements, and implement a very simple tool that validate if host is compatible with container or not over the specification. So try to keep it much simpler than it was before. And I dropped the idea of improving image selection because I have no good idea for that right now, except what I think what Brandon showed before with these annotations, that simple would work. So I just keep that very, very like simplified regarding to this what was before there. So maybe yeah, saying a little bit more about that, there would be artifact of new type compatibility that you put graph specification. I propose some new language or using JSON graph format, but my opinion is that we shouldn't like use external tools like this JSON graph format completely, because we want to have in-house maintenance because of complete control over the specification and so on. So how you represent that in the artifact is discussable, but the basic idea is we provide a simple tool to validate compatibility specification against host OS. And if there is another requirements from other communities like improve scheduling on Kubernetes cluster, node provisioning, and so on, it would be up to you to implement everything on top of this project so that we keep the scope very small. Yeah, if you scroll down, Brandon, do you have here the suggested scope of a little bit up? There was a suggested scope for this a little bit more if you can. And yeah, OCI compatibility tool. You have create artifact, pull and push artifact, validate compatibility specification host, and output the compatibility spec in a readable form. I'm coming mostly from telco use cases and use cases where you need to have a specific operating system configuration for containers because they are not portable otherwise. Sorry, that was maybe a bad sentence. I meant that in telco use cases, we often require specific host configuration, and we have to have a way to like describe this in unified format, and that is understandable by everyone, that we can migrate from one platform to another one and validate this stuff.
Folks have any questions for Marcin on this one? I think C and D were both Vanessa, and I think she is leaning toward D, so I'm just going to present just this one. And I am not as probably the right person to talk about it.
But
Marcin,
I think
how comfortable? Go ahead.
I think her proposal is similar what I presented in my proposal B, but she extends the scope because she is she likes to have an artifact as well to represent compatibility spec, but she would like to use this artifact for image selection in container runtimes. So what Brandon said before, we would have to face the problems that we have to iterate over the descriptors. And also she combines an idea to improve schedulers, like for example, Kubernetes schedulers by this proposal. I don't know exact details about that, how this should work in that case. But from my understanding is that she thinks we should put some context of schedulers into the specification. I don't want to say something wrong here, so keep in mind that that Vanessa would be appropriate person to explain that. However, this is my understanding, at least so far. And yeah, she would like to use JSON graph format to represent everything. And anything else in here? I'm not sure.
She has prettier line art than I do.
I know she prototyped already some stuff that showed that their use case will be covered by this, but it's a matter right now that we have to find agreement within the working group how it should work. And I think that's gonna be a little bit challenging because sometimes we are a little bit on different. We have different opinions, but that should be solvable.
We have a bunch of people coming from very different directions, and so that's why I wanted to bring this up to the higher level group just to say, be aware that some of this is happening, and if we have opinions at a higher level from the OCI side, that would be good to give feedback sooner rather than later. It's a lot easier to fix this stuff in design rather than we're trying to merge a PR later on. All right, stunned silence from the peanut gallery, it sounds like. In that case, Ron, we got another 34 minutes here. You want to chat about some of the search stuff that you want to ask about?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So I think let me just give some context here, right? So I think this was an issue that Steve filed a really long time ago. And I think it got killed, I guess, at some point because I think it was a little too premature at that point. So now what is happening here is on the CNCF side, the Kubernetes family, right? So the CNCF side, there's a lot of innovation happening on software delivery. Then you have your Carvel packaging, Pulumi, and so on. So there are a bunch of guys bringing out a lot of stuff. And the way the CNCF reacts to all of this is this is actually getting out of control. So we should probably standardize some of this stuff. And then out of that comes a requirement for a special interest group, and that is the artifacts special interest group. And the ask there is, can we at least standardize some of the use cases so that the rest of the ecosystem doesn't have to chase all these different implementations. So the first step in that in scope of that SIG is, can we at least start with supporting search among all the artifacts that are out there. So at least if you, that's a somewhat of a low hanging fruit, because you can at least standardize that interface, then you can do your own implementation underneath, but at least you have a way to look around things. And as it turns out, it's very difficult to separate CNCF and OCI because of all the image, runtime, and distribution specs, right? So that already exists, and they sort of work together. So now there is a bridge to be built from CNCF to OCI, saying that anyway, you have all this registry work that is going on. Can you support some of these search requirements on the OCI side, and the artifact SIG can sort of ride on that? So that is the thinking there. So that's why I just want to canvas some opinion on what folks think about reviving some of this stuff, whether this is something that can be standardized so that at least on the OCI side, the scope would be within OCI registries, OCI compatible registries. So at least they will benefit from this as well. So that's the context.
Trying to wait a minute, see if anybody else has opinions on this before I jump in.
So if you scroll all the way down, Brandon, so all the way down, so there's the state of the search is like this. So each registry does their own implementation. So from a client point of view, there is value in standardization. So there is that.
My own take is wondering how bogged down we're going to get in trying to get through all the details, whether it makes sense to run this to a working group or not. But I'm also in my own thought process thinking of all the other stuff that I want to try to get into, something like a 1.2, and whether this would be something to push off until later, just knowing how big this is going to end up being. But that is just me as one person. And knowing that we're still trying to get a 1.1 out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, not, yeah, 1.2. I don't remember why we moved away from discussing this, but it does. I know it's come up a few times.
The biggest concern I'm going to have is trying to work out authentication. I feel like that's going to be a stumbling block for some registries. Because my suspicion is that a lot of these APIs are not. Yeah, we do have OCI working group auth that has been a very quiet working group because it's just hard to get people to spend the time doing some stuff. Right now we're spread a little thin, I think is the best way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Looking at this, I wouldn't be surprised if some registries have implemented search, but scoped. And so you can search, but within your own little organization, not across all the companies that might have some content on our registry. And so that's where I start to wonder if, okay, if we start to scope this into certain namespaces, then suddenly you might get into cases where the auth for this might be very different from the auth on a different registry. But then I also know, Ram, you've implemented this yourself. And so I think some of this might be overthinking some of these problems. We'll see. And then how much people want to be able to search on some of these contents in here. Do you have annotations? You do. This is one I know I've heard a bunch of requests for, which I don't think it's registry wide that they've been asking for it, but they've been looking for this within an individual repo at least. And saying I might be pushing a whole bunch of different tags in there, but I want to see all the tags that have a specific annotation set because that has some definition for them, whatever they're doing with that. See your chat messages there. So you're saying you would put that as a qualifier. Everywhere else in OCI, we put that as the part right after the V2 though. And so instead of having a global API, having the API able to be scoped down, I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think that is that's again a discussion to be had. So at least the way we have designed the APIs on the distributions, but they're mostly, I think, aligned along the RESTful lines. You have a per resource kind of APIs. So this one is more a GraphQL type of approach, right? So where you scope it globally. So anyway, it's an approach. So I maybe we do one, maybe we do both.
And the in-between case is going to be, say, for example, with Docker Hub, you've got the username in there. And so could you ever search for everything under a specific username, not caring about all the repos in there? You're just authenticating as your user to access all of your images. And then searching across multiple things, but all by your user. Similar for other registries where they would have like an organization name or something up front and then a whole bunch of images under the organization. But then to Sajay's comment, whether we want to try to scope this to a single repo search first, that might overlap, not sure, but some of the thoughts I'm thinking of for rehashing the tag listing response and whether or not we want to give that some more capability. So maybe this is something good to chat about now versus later, just knowing that if we try to implement a search API in the future, how much can we overlap, reuse, make the same interface for a tag listing versus a higher level search?
I think two thoughts around the two discussions that came is, given the referrers we have, how do we search for referrers? Or how do we search for manifests that don't have a referrer, and things like that did come up internally. The extension model can apply on both. It can apply at the registry level or at the repository level. If you have an opportunity to say that the same extension on the repository works for all the same search criteria, and we could have a similar construct on the registry as well, because catalog is deprecated now, right? And we don't talk about how catalog can work. The other conversations is I mean, tag listing is one, but there's a ton of manifest listing queries that we don't support or we don't talk about. But that's come up, and every cloud provider has had to implement their own hand-rolled mechanism of some query language and things like that. So, I mean, if you're prioritizing, my priority would be to an ability to at least find the manifests, irrespective of tags, either through annotations, either through some filters.
My first priority is to be able to return untagged manifest.
Oh yeah, okay. So we both saying the same thing, right?
So I'm going to start with just give me the untagged manifest in a search response, and also return descriptors, not individual names. And then from that point, then you can start building stuff on top of it. But it would be nice to start being able to put more queries and options and stuff like that on there.
Ram, is there an ask for show me all the manifests that have a specific tag?
Show me all the manifests. That should be, no, yeah, that could be basically a search. So you will say list with a search, right? So criterion. So yeah, we should probably add that.
Because one of the
You're saying
yeah, go ahead.
saying the same tag across multiple repositories?
Yeah,
Or are
yeah.
you saying
That's what it sounds like to me.
I'm starting with the same repository because that itself is sometimes hard when people retag so many times.
so you're
So
going historical?
even before historical, if we can say that somebody's going to delete a manifest, but it's referenced by 50 other tags, please don't go delete it. That's kind of where I'm very simplistic things that we don't have APIs for, right?
That I feel like a better tag listing could give us, because right now the tag listing doesn't say, here's the tag and here's the digest that tag refers to.
Right.
And so just being able to go in the reverse of saying, give me the tag listing that's got that extra detail for each tag might give us that reverse. Be a client-side implementation, but at least you would have all the data in one place to implement it.
We have repositories with 10,000 plus or even close to 20,000 tags, and that becomes really hard to filter on the client at that point for every request. That's kind of the motivation here. So if somebody tries to say that I want to block this manifest, it impacts like a ton of tags underneath, and being able to get a list of this is what your impact is going to be is the scenario that we're going after. But how do you want to progress with this? Like, should we write up proposals or?
Sajay, your previous question though, would that be the digest you're listing though? To say, tell me all of the tags that point to a digest?
We get a CVE with the digest. Now we got to figure out what all it's pointing to. And there's no registry API today that tells you that, right? Like we can query for the digest, but you can't unless you go back to some indexed query. Yes, that portion will, that response of that is what all does it have? Does it have all the tags that it's pointing to, or do we have to go back to a tag listing to find out all the tags it's pointing to? History is another thing. I think that's a wonderful thing. If you can do the journaling thing, that would be awesome as well.
Yeah, but I think that's the question you're getting at though, is what is the response from this query going to look like? Because that's something that I'm curious of, just looking at this in general. Ram, do you have thoughts on what the response to these search queries is going to look like? We said what the queries themselves are, but
Yeah, I should have put a response. Yeah, I think there should be. Okay, let me try not to get into trouble here. I think it should be very similar to what we do for artifact search, right? So the reference list is my thinking, but it doesn't have to be, because there's if this is going to be designed like a GraphQL thing, then it doesn't have to be. It can be its own language.
Yeah, if we try to start including tags in there, then how we put it in that index is going to be interesting. It was easy using the index when all we had was the descriptor, but once you start trying to say, here's the tag that digest points to, we're adding more data in there, and the tag is going to be an array, so it doesn't necessarily fall into a nice annotation mapping that we normally do. Stuff to think about.
At least I'm glad that this didn't get dismissed right away. So there seems to be some interest, maybe worth pursuing. So
At least from Sajay and myself, I think we're very interested starting at the repo level and then building out. But I think solving the higher level question might be useful for how we implement it at the repo level. So might be a little bit of both. All right, and he is not here to enjoy the victory, but Sam is back as our TW chair here again. So congrats to Sam. Sam, if you happen to watch the recording, round of applause. All right, anything else on search, image compatibility, our open votes that we have for the 1.1.0 releases, or anything else we haven't talked about today that folks want to chat about? Got a quiet group today.
I don't know, I'm asking the obvious question. How do we get others to vote on this or not?
It is the obvious question. I don't know.
Okay.
You know, do we have to like do bribery for you to get you to vote, or are you just busy like everybody, like all of us? I do accept bribery if that helps.
yeah, maybe we advertise it on Slack just so that get some more eyes on this,
Okay.
OCI general thing.
Yeah, I did drop the initial post in Slack. I just tagged all the maintainers again, so we'll see if that gets their attention in the issue itself. We've got the email out there. I suspect this is just one that's big enough that people want to spend some time looking at, and some folks are just don't have the time to do it, which I wish they did. But
this is going to be more work, and they taking the inertia argument. Of course, you want to avoid that. But the people who are really interested will move on this. So let's see.
all right, anything else? Last call before I give you all back 15 minutes.
Mhm.
All right, folks, have a good rest of the week. Hopefully we'll make some progress and get a 1.1 release out here soon. And yeah, go forth and have a good one.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks. Bye.